Have you ever felt like the old playbooks just, well, don't cut it anymore? Especially when you're navigating really complex global situations. You know that feeling, right? When the path forward seems murky and the traditional answers just feel way too rigid. Today, we're embarking on a really unique journey here on the Deep Dive. We're plunging into an ancient source, the I Ching, or the Book of Change. But in this is key, through the remarkably relevant lens of a contemporary leader. Our mission is to extract timeless wisdom, not just, philosophical musings, but stuff that's profoundly applicable to the most pressing challenges in modern leadership. We want to offer you a shortcut, really, to being truly well-informed in a world that just never stops shifting.
And what's truly fascinating here, I think, is how something almost 3 millennia old can offer such profound clarity and practical guidance, really, for the now, especially when it feels like, well, everything is constantly shifting under our feet. We've been given some incredible excerpts from the I Ching, Ancient Wisdom for Modern Leadership, and our guide through this material, well, he's a truly unique voice, someone who walks between ancient and emerging worlds.
Right. And who is this guide, this unique voice? He is Lóng Tíng, a male narrator and author, but beyond that, he's a coach, a mentor, and the CEO of Lóng Tíng Enterprises. And he describes himself, as you said, as someone who truly walks between these two seemingly disparate worlds, deeply rooted in East Asian thought and wisdom, yet fully present and engaged in the global now. He's not just an academic. He really embodies what it means to build bridges, literally and metaphorically, between West and East, between tradition and modernity. He pictures it quite beautifully, I think, like a delicate yet resilient bamboo path leading toward a quiet mountain temple. You see, this isn't just theory we're exploring today. It's wisdom that's been filtered through extensive practical experience, real-world stuff in complex intercultural environments. His perspective offers us, I believe, a genuinely new way to be well-informed, to understand how to adapt with grace, and how to lead effectively when the ground beneath us is constantly moving. It's about more than just knowledge. It's a different kind of operational wisdom.
Absolutely. And this approach, it isn't about finding some singular magic bullet, right? Or a one-time fix for every problem. Instead, it's about cultivating a fundamentally different way of seeing, a different way of interacting with the world, and maybe most importantly, a different way of being as a leader. And that, for any leader facing today's inherent uncertainties and the, well, unprecedented rates of change, that's an incredibly powerful and enduring tool.
So what specifically will you, our listener, gain from this deep dive into this ancient text and Lóng Tíng's modern interpretation? By the end of our conversation, you'll have a shortcut, we hope, to understanding how the I Ching isn't just some ancient text or, some kind of fortune-telling device for parlor tricks. It is, in fact, a deeply practical map for modern leadership, particularly when it comes to navigating rapid change and the intricate dynamics of intercultural communication. We'll uncover its core philosophy. We'll explore a surprising and quite powerful personal anecdote from Lóng Tíng's own life that really shaped his understanding. And then we'll break down 3 fundamental principles for impactful, resonant leadership. Principles that you can genuinely apply, hopefully, immediately in your own context. So let's really get into it.
Okay, let's unpack this first 3 millennia. That's an almost unimaginable lifespan for any text, isn't it?
It really is staggering, especially one that wasn't just like a historical record tucked away somewhere, but something actively used and consulted, something that actually shaped decisions and perspectives. The I Ching, the Book of Change, has indeed been with humanity for almost 3,000 years. Just think about that for a moment. Empires rising and falling, entire civilizations transforming.
Countless upheavals.
And yet this particular text has persisted, not as a dusty relic, but as a living guide. And for leaders, that longevity, well, it immediately tells you something, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
It tells us that certain patterns of human change, and natural change too, must be universal.
Yeah.
And for leaders, understanding those universal patterns is profoundly relevant, even today, because the underlying human dynamics of change haven't fundamentally altered, even if the technology around us has, radically.
That extraordinary longevity absolutely signals its enduring relevance, and our source material makes it really clear. In its earliest form, the I Ching was never meant to be some distant philosophical theory, locked away in ivory towers or reserved for a select few. Quite the opposite, actually. It was a practical tool, a fundamental way for human beings from emperors down to farmers to read the hidden rhythm between heaven and earth. It was a method to discern patterns, to understand the flow of natural and human events, to gain insights into timing and, crucially, appropriate action.
So like a guide for when and how
Precisely, it was seen as a dynamic mirror reflecting the current state of affairs and suggesting inherent tendencies, helping people understand when to act and how to act in alignment with, well, the larger forces at play. Imagine relying on a text to understand subtle shifts in, say, the climate or the social mood before making a crucial decision.
And then, fascinatingly, it evolved. It wasn't static itself, which kind of mirrors its own core philosophy, right?
Exactly. It transformed over centuries. A really diverse group scholars, powerful rulers, even wandering hermits, they all contributed. They realized it was far more than a mere oracle for just, yes-no questions or simple predictions. It transformed into a profound map, a map of how life itself unfolds in its entirety. And this map is expressed through 64 distinct configurations of yin and yang.
Those fundamental forces.
Yes, those complementary forces, darkness and light, receptivity and activity, expansion and contraction, all of that. Each of these 64 configurations, or hexagrams as they're called, captures a particular archetypal stage in the continuous movement of change. They're like snapshots of dynamic situations.
A map of how life unfolds. That's such a powerful and evocative phrase. But it does raise a practical question, doesn't it? How can just 64 configurations, no matter how intricate they might be, possibly encapsulate the entirety of human experience, or the sheer vastness of change? It almost sounds, too simple in its number, yet maybe too complex in its ambition at the same time. How does that actually work as a useful tool for a leader today?
That's a really perceptive question. And it's where the metaphor of the map truly deepens, I think. The I Ching doesn't aim to describe every single event in explicit detail. It's not about predicting the future deterministically. Instead, it captures archetypal patterns, patterns of interaction, growth, decline, conflict, harmony, stagnation, progress, retreat.
So universal themes.
Universal themes, exactly. Leadership, followership, innovation, all these core dynamics. And think of it less like a literal street map telling you exactly where every pothole is, and more like a sophisticated meteorological map.
All right.
It doesn't tell you precisely where every single raindrop will fall or, who exactly gets caught in the storm, but it shows you the prevailing atmospheric conditions, the high pressure fronts moving in, the low pressure, the direction of the winds. It shows you the tendencies of the weather system.
I see. The underlying forces.
Exactly. Similarly, the 64 hexagrams represent these universal states or situations that humans, groups, organizations, even whole societies find themselves in. They symbolize the interplay of forces and the inherent tendencies within any given moment. So for a leader, the immediate insight is don't just chase the symptoms, discern the underlying currents.
Okay. Go deeper.
Yes. This allows you to position your team, your strategy, or even just your personal energy in alignment with the emerging reality, rather than just reacting constantly to surface level events. It's about recognizing where you are in the grand unfolding and therefore figuring out what kind of action or maybe even non-action is most appropriate right now.
So it's about understanding the essence of a situation, the underlying currents, like you said, not just getting caught up in the daily noise. That's a huge shift in perspective for, problem solving and strategic planning.
Yeah.
Moving from just reactive to deeply proactive. And it's truly remarkable that somehow this profound text survived everything: dynastic collapse, massive cultural shifts, colonization.
It's incredible.
And it still speaks to something profoundly human today. That resilience alone tells you there's something really special here. It implies a kind of universality that goes way beyond specific historical periods or cultural boundaries.
It absolutely does. It speaks to that deep human need we all have, I think, for understanding the unpredictable nature of existence and for finding some kind of guidance within it, regardless of the era we live in. It's about navigating life with wisdom, maybe, rather than just brute force. And that's a timeless need. For leaders, it offers a framework, a way to understand not just what is happening, but why it's happening in terms of these universal patterns, and importantly, what the most resonant response might be.
Okay, here's where it gets surprising, and maybe most relatable for many of us listening.
Yeah.
Ting's own introduction to this ancient text wasn't in some stuffy academic setting, or a high-powered leadership workshop full of jargon. He remembers his first encounter really vividly. He was just a teenager, and the grandmother of a close friend, a woman he describes as having this quiet, powerful presence. She placed an old, slightly frayed copy of the I Ching on the table. He says it felt like it belonged to a different world entirely.
Wow.
And she didn't explain it in the usual sense, like defining terms or giving a history lesson. The source tells us she translated its spirit.
Translated its spirit. That phrase alone raises such an important question for us, doesn't it? What does it even mean to translate the spirit of a text like the I Ching, rather than just explaining its literal meaning? It's just a transmission of something deeper, right? An intuitive understanding that goes beyond purely intellectual comprehension.
Like a feeling.
Exactly. It's about resonance. And what she said to him, which Long Ting recounts, is just so profound. This, she said, is not a book you conquer. It's a book that teaches you how to listen.
Not a book you conquer. It's a book that teaches you how to listen. Wow. That's an incredibly powerful statement, isn't it?
Yeah.
Especially in the context of leadership, which so often in our modern world seems to be about conquering challenges, dominating markets, mastering domains, or winning the competition. How does not a book you conquer imply a fundamentally different approach for a leader when they're facing knowledge or challenges? And how does teaches you how to listen contrast so sharply with, typical leadership directives, which often emphasize speaking, directing, making those decisive pronouncements, setting a firm vision? Surely there's a tension there for many leaders.
Well, that's a crucial tension, absolutely. And it highlights the immediate paradigm shift that I Ching proposes. To conquer, as you said, implies imposing your will, asserting control, maybe even battling against a situation or a competitor. It's a posture of force.
Right.
But the I Ching, through the grandmother's profound wisdom, suggests a radically different posture. One of humility, receptivity, and an acknowledgement that some things are not meant to be forced, but rather understood, sensed, and moved with. True mastery in this context isn't about overcoming external obstacles through sheer willpower or brute force. It's about cultivating an internal alignment with the flow of things. It's about seeing the inherent tendencies and then working with them. And teaches you how to listen suggests an equally radical form of engagement. Instead of just speaking to the world or at the world broadcasting your commands, a leader is invited to listen to the world.
Tune in.
Exactly. Tuning into the subtle cues, the unspoken needs of their team, the underlying currents in a market, or even the nascent shifts in the cultural mood. And let's be clear, this isn't passive. It's an intensely active, discerning form of attention. It stands in stark contrast to the leader who maybe believes they have all the answers and simply needs to broadcast them for execution. And just to touch on your point about crisis leadership, the argument isn't that you don't act decisively, it's that your action is informed by deep listening, which makes it more resonant and ultimately more effective. Sometimes listening deeply is the most decisive action you can take, because it prevents you from making a huge misstep based on incomplete information or just an arrogant assumption of control.
And she didn't stop there, apparently. Long Ting recalls her speaking about seasons, about timing, about subtle shifts in the air. He admits he didn't fully grasp it all that day. I mean, he's a teenager after all.
Understandable.
But something resonated deep inside him. A quiet knowing, he calls it. Long before he knew he would one day work in global leadership and intercultural communication, building those bridges. It's almost like an intuitive seed was planted,
Sure.
A feeling or intuition about timing and subtle shifts that would serve him decades later. Just a precognition of the very essence of his later work.
That anecdote really underscores a critical point. And it applies to all of us, I think.
Yeah.
True understanding often comes from that deep resonance and openness, not just from intellectual grasp. It's about developing an intuitive sensitivity, a kind of internal tuning fork, maybe, that vibrates with the true nature of a situation, even before you can articulate it logically.
It's a great image.
And for a leader, this means being attuned not just to the hard data and the analytical reports, which are important, of course, but also to the mood of their team, the unspoken concerns of a client, the nascent shifts in a market, or the underlying dynamics in a cross-cultural negotiation. It's about sensing the invisible dynamics at play, the human currents beneath the surface, and allowing that sensing to inform your strategic decisions and your communication. This kind of intuitive listening often provides insights that purely analytical approaches might completely miss, and that can give a leader a significant edge.
Okay, so at its heart, the I Ching carries a simple, yet, profoundly challenging truth. Nothing stays fixed. Not power, not our roles, not even meaning itself. This is incredibly counterintuitive for many of us, isn't it? Particularly in leadership, where we're often wired to crave stability, to build enduring structures, and to seek certainty in our strategies.
Oh, absolutely. This concept of impermanence or just ceaseless change, which is so central to East Asian thought and the I Ching, it directly challenges a very common Western inclination towards stability, control, and the pursuit of permanent solutions in leadership. We're often trained, aren't we, to build things that last, to create robust systems, engineer processes that are predictable and unchanging.
The status quo.
Exactly. But the I Ching posits that change isn't just an occasional event or a disruption to be managed and then gotten back to normal. It is the fundamental, inescapable nature of reality. It's the water we swim in, essentially.
Yeah.
And consider the immense psychological implications for leaders who try to cling to fixed ideas in such a dynamic world. They might experience severe burnout just from constantly fighting against the current, or deep frustration when their perfect plan inevitably encounters unforeseen variables, or even outright denial in the face of overwhelming evidence of change.
Yeah, you see that happen.
You do. And this rigidity can lead to a whole host of detrimental behaviors. Micromanagement, a fear of delegation, stifled innovation because new ideas threaten the established order, and just an inability to pivot quickly when needed. This idea really challenges the very pursuit of certainty in business or life. It suggests certainty is an illusion, a temporary state at best. The real skill, the true art of leadership, lies in adapting to flux, in cultivating a mind that embraces fluidity rather than fighting for stasis. It's about moving from that mindset of control and predict to one of adapt and respond.
Okay, so if nothing stays fixed, then our approach to leadership has to shift dramatically. The Book of Change doesn't teach us how to control reality, and this feels like the crucial pivot here for any aspiring leader. It teaches us how to resonate with it.
Yes, that distinction is paramount. It's absolutely not about manipulating outcomes through force. Instead, the I Ching asks these core questions. When is it truly time to step forward with decisive action? And crucially, when is wisdom found in stepping back, in pausing, in quiet observation, and allowing things to unfold naturally? This fundamentally reorients the leader's stance, from being, say, a conductor who dictates every single note, to being more like a participant who listens deeply to the emerging symphony.
Okay, so what does it truly mean to resonate with reality in a leadership context?
Yeah.
How does that differ from those traditional concepts we celebrate, like decisive action or taking charge?
Well, traditionally, we might think of leadership as defining the direction, setting the pace, making swift decisions, and then imposing them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Top down. Exactly. But resonating implies a much deeper listening, a sensing of the situation's inherent rhythm, and then moving with that rhythm rather than trying to impose a separate one from the outside. It's about finding harmony with the unfolding rather than fighting against it. It's less about trying to move mountains through sheer will and more about understanding where the tectonic plates are already shifting and then aligning your efforts with that natural movement.
So in that sense, leadership is not merely a title. It is, as Lóng Tíng suggests, a long, patient practice of listening. And this isn't just listening to words people say, is it? It's about something far deeper, something that many leaders, I think, often overlook in the constant rush to produce results.
You're absolutely right. It's about listening to the entire context, listening to the subtle energy of a room, maybe, to the unspoken anxieties or aspirations within a team, to the quiet signals from the market, and even, importantly, to one's own intuition about the timing of things.
That inner voice.
Yes. This holistic listening means recognizing what's not being said, observing body language, understanding cultural nuances, sensing those underlying currents of resistance or perhaps emergent alignment. Imagine a scenario. A leader feels immense pressure to be decisive, maintain a strong image, right?
Sure.
So they force a new strategic direction or a major organizational change without adequately listening to the concerns, the readiness, or the collective wisdom of their team. What often happens? Friction, passive resistance, resentment, and ultimately a less effective outcome, or even outright failure, despite the initial decisiveness.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
Conversely, consider a leader who patiently observes, listens deeply, allows for open dialogue even when it's uncomfortable, and maybe waits for that opportune moment when a collective understanding or consensus begins to form naturally. When they then act, it's not an imposition. It feels more like an amplification of an emergent truth. And that usually leads to far better, more sustainable, and often more energetic results. It's the difference between trying to paddle upstream against a strong current using pure muscle exhausting,
Right.
versus recognizing the current and strategically using it to propel you forward with far less effort and far greater impact. #tag 3 principles for modern intercultural leadership.
Okay, so what does this profound philosophical shift really mean for you, the listener, in your day-to-day work, especially in a world that's increasingly globalized and interconnected? Lóng Tíng, our guide through this ancient wisdom, he distills the I Ching's insights into 3 fundamental principles: principles he finds especially relevant in complex intercultural situations. These are things he applies constantly in his own work, building those crucial bridges between East and West, tradition and modernity. Principle number 1. Leadership is situational, not static. The core argument here is basically that there is no internal best practice, no universal panacea that works everywhere, every time. A strategy that worked perfectly yesterday might already be outdated tomorrow, or completely inappropriate for a different cultural context. We hear so much about best practices in business, don't we? Almost as if they're universal, timeless laws.
Well, constantly.
But Lóng suggests that's actually a dangerous illusion.
This principle directly challenges that very notion of universal management models or one-size-fits-all solutions. In a world that is increasingly interconnected and diverse, applying a rigid best practice can actually be detrimental, actively harmful even, if it doesn't account for the specific cultural nuances, the historical context, the current market dynamics, or just the unique psychological makeup of a given situation. Why? Because what is best is always relative to the context. It just is.
Right. It depends.
Exactly. A leadership style that thrives in a highly individualistic, fast-paced culture might completely flounder in a collectivist culture that values consensus and indirect communication. A decision-making process that works for a tiny, agile startup will likely crash and burn in a large, multi-generational bureaucratic corporation with entrenched hierarchies. The whole idea of a static best practice becomes a liability, really, in a truly dynamic, global environment.
Okay, so if best practices aren't eternal, what really matters then? The source tells us it's our capacity to read the context, to really feel what this specific team in this unique cultural constellation at this precise moment, what it's truly asking for or needing. That's a subtle but profound shift, isn't it? From intellectual knowing the answer to a more intuitive feeling the context. How do we actually do that? And how can that possibly be seen as a strength in a world that constantly demands decisive leadership?
That's where the phrase disciplined awareness comes in. And it's crucial. This isn't about softness or indecision or just caving to every whim. Not at all. It is, as Lóng emphasizes, disciplined awareness. It is care. Being situational is a profound strength precisely because it cultivates true effectiveness and resilience. It requires intense observation, deep empathy, and the agility to adapt one's approach rather than rigidly clinging to some predetermined script. Let's maybe consider a concrete example. Imagine Sarah, a new VP of operations, right? She arrives from Silicon Valley to lead a manufacturing team in Thailand.
Okay, big shift.
Huge shift. Back in California, her best practice was daily stand-ups, rapid-fire feedback sessions, immediate, direct problem solving, very agile. When she tries to implement this exact methodology in her new Thai team, what happens? She's met with polite nods, minimal direct feedback in meetings, and decisions that seem to get relitigated offline, leading to delays and huge frustration for her.
Why?
Because she failed to account for a culture that deeply values hierarchy, uses indirect communication to preserve face, and prefers slower, consensus-driven decision-making processes. Her best practice was entirely misaligned with their underlying cultural operating system.
Total mismatch.
Total mismatch. Conversely, a leader who adapts their communication style may be using more indirect language, fostering longer consensus-building discussions, perhaps through intermediaries, allowing for face-saving mechanisms. Adapting to the specific cultural norms of that team is likely to achieve far greater buy-in, efficiency, and sustained success. They're not abandoning their goals, but they are adapting their method of achieving them.
Okay, so for our listeners leading globalized teams, how does this principle become even more critical? It seems exponentially more complex. And how can a leader actually cultivate this disciplined awareness when they're already pulled in so many directions, dealing with competing demands, tight deadlines? It sounds like a full-time job in itself.
Well, globalized teams inherently bring together diverse cultural assumptions about everything, really. Communication, hierarchy, time, conflict, decision-making. What's considered polite or efficient or effective varies wildly from one region to another. So a leader has to become a kind of cultural chameleon, not by abandoning their own values, no, but by understanding and respecting the different lenses through which their team members operate. It requires real cultural humility, acknowledging that your way isn't the only way, or even always the best way in a given context. Now, cultivating disciplined awareness, it involves several practical steps, I think. Firstly, it's about active, multisensory listening, not just hearing words, but tuning into silence, body language, team dynamics, emotional undertones.
Reading the room.
Reading the whole room, yes. This includes asking truly open-ended questions that invite deeper context, observing how decisions are actually made in practice, and being genuinely curious about cultural norms that might differ from your own. Secondly, it means continuous self-awareness, understanding your own biases, your assumptions, your cultural programming, and how they might impact your perception of a situation. Are you projecting your own norms onto others without realizing it?
That's a tough one.
It is. Thirdly, it involves seeking out diverse perspectives intentionally, creating spaces where people from different backgrounds can share their viewpoints without judgment. This might mean informal coffee chats, encouraging anonymous feedback, maybe even bringing in external cultural consultants sometimes. And finally, it's about experimenting, trying different approaches and learning from the outcomes, good or bad. It's a continuous learning process, a commitment to perpetual contextual calibration. Letting yourself be taught by the situation itself takes time, yes, absolutely. But the payoff in terms of trust, effectiveness, and preventing really costly missteps is immense.
Okay, let's move to principle number 2. Influence arises from alignment, not from force. Lóng Tíng shares his own very relatable frustration here. He says, whenever I try to push an idea across cultural boundaries, I feel the resistance, even when the idea is good.
That's such a common experience for leaders, isn't it? Trying to impose a great idea and just hitting a wall of quiet resistance, or maybe even outright rejection despite the obvious merits.
It's an incredibly common frustration, yes, and it speaks to a fundamental misunderstanding of what true influence really is. We often equate leadership with the power to command, to issue directives, to push through an agenda, particularly when we believe our idea is superior.
Right, gotta make it happen.
Exactly. But the I Ching and Lóng Tíng's extensive experience point to an alternative. A more subtle and ultimately more powerful path, he says. But when I slow down, when I listen to what is already silently forming between people, influence becomes a quiet act of co-creation. The I Ching calls this aligning ourselves with the deeper movement of things, or Shi, spelled S-H-H-I.
Shi. Okay, that's a powerful term. What exactly does Shi mean in this context? You said it's not about passive observation, right? It's about sensing the inherent potential or direction of a situation and moving with it rather than against it. Can you give us a deeper understanding of Shi for the modern leader?
You're absolutely right. It's far from passive. She refers to the inherent power, the prevailing tendency, the underlying momentum, or you could say the natural strategic advantage within a situation. It's not just what is right now, but what is emerging, where the collective energy is naturally flowing.
To align with Shi means to discern the path of least resistance. Now, that's not out of weakness or complacency, it's out of strategic wisdom and deep insight. It's recognizing where the energy naturally wants to go, where the group is already leaning, maybe, or where the market forces are heading. Then, instead of trying to force a different direction through sheer willpower, you subtly guide and amplify that existing momentum. Think of Shi as recognizing the prevailing market current, or the organizational mood, or even the subtle psychological lean of your team in a negotiation. It's the difference between trying to paddle a boat upstream against a raging river, which is pure force, immense effort, often little progress, and just leads to exhaustion.
In there.
Right. Versus reading the river, understanding its flow, identifying the eddies and currents, and then using that natural momentum to propel you forward with far greater ease and efficiency. It's not passive, it's a highly active form of strategic observation and empathetic engagement. Leaders often mistake taking charge for brute force, but she suggests true power comes from understanding and then amplifying inherent momentum. Almost like a judo master uses an opponent's own force against them. It's about leveraging existing energy rather than trying to generate it all from scratch.
Okay, so how can our listeners actually identify what is already silently forming between people in their own interactions, whether it's with a team, a client, a stakeholder? This points to nonverbal cues, underlying motivations, unspoken needs, which can be incredibly hard to read, especially across different cultures. What are the practical steps to cultivate this kind of sensitivity?
This is really where cultivating a keen sense of emotional intelligence and cultural empathy becomes paramount. It's absolutely crucial. It means paying attention to more than just the literal words being spoken, much more. What are the pauses saying? What are the facial expressions communicating? What might silence signify in this particular cultural context? Is it agreement, dissent, or just deference?
So many possibilities.
Exactly. What historical context or past experiences might be shaping the current interaction, creating unspoken apprehensions or maybe hopes? Are there underlying norms of deference or indirectness that you need to be aware of? It's about looking for those subtle signals. Signals of consensus or apprehension, unspoken desires, or maybe nascent ideas that are still fragile and unformed. Practically, this involves asking genuinely open-ended questions, questions that invite deeper sharing rather than closed questions that just confirm your own assumptions. It means practicing active listening, where you're not just waiting for your turn to speak, but truly absorbing and reflecting back what you hear both verbally and non-verbally.
That takes discipline.
It really does. It means creating psychological safety, a space where people feel comfortable expressing half-formed thoughts, or even concerns that might seem irrational to a purely logical mind. It means observing meeting dynamics carefully. Who speaks when? Who defers to whom? What happens after the meeting in the informal chats? Compare a leader who dictates a new process from on high versus one who facilitates a series of discussions, allowing the team's shared understanding and ideas to emerge organically. The energy required to push a heavy stone uphill is immense, right? But if you can sense the natural incline of the terrain and find the path of least resistance, the stone moves with far greater ease and velocity. Influence through alignment is about finding that natural ease and cultivating it. And the long-term benefits are incredible. Greater buy-in, more sustainable solutions, and a truly empowered team that feels heard and co-creative.
And that brings us to the final principle, number 3. Every change contains its opposite. So act with humility. It's a fascinating, almost paradoxical idea. The I Ching reminds us that every flourishing moment already contains the seed of transformation. Success holds the seed of decline. Stability carries the impulse of disruption. That seems, I don't know, a bit cynical, doesn't it? Or at least counterintuitive to our aspirations for lasting success and growth. We often aim for perpetual growth. Isn't that the goal?
That's a very natural reaction, I think. But Lóng Tíng clarifies that this isn't cynical at all. In fact, he describes it as gentle. It's not a pessimistic outlook. It's profoundly pragmatic and, paradoxically, incredibly empowering. Think about it. If you deeply understand that impermanence is the only true constant, then you're never truly blindsided or surprised by change. Nor do you become complacent in moments of success.
Okay. Less complacency.
Yes. It means you lead not from a place of ego or clinging, but from a posture of stewardship. You stop clinging to the illusion of certainty and instead focus on cultivating readiness, on being perpetually prepared for the next wave of transformation, whatever it may be. This perspective actually frees leaders from the fear of loss, the anxiety of failure, and the immense pressure of trying to maintain some static, ideal state forever. It allows them to embrace the cyclical, dynamic nature of growth and decay, of innovation and disruption as natural parts of any living system, not as exceptions, but as the rule.
Let's delve into that distinction you made. Leadership from stewardship versus leadership driven by ego or a need for control. How does that actually manifest differently? What does stewardship look like in practice?
Well, leadership driven by ego often seeks to perpetuate personal power, right?
Right.
Or maintain a specific image, or cling fiercely to past successes. It fears failure deeply and resists anything that threatens its established position or its perceived infallibility.
Protecting turf.
Exactly. This leads to rigidity, defensiveness, and a dangerous blindness to emerging threats or opportunities. Such a leader might ignore crucial market signals, dismiss dissenting opinions, or stubbornly double down on failing strategies, precisely because their ego is so deeply invested in proving they were right all along. They equate stability with absolute control, and any change is seen as a direct threat to that control, something to be suppressed. This can lead to organizational stagnation and eventually, well, irrelevance. Stewardship, on the other hand, is about understanding that you are a temporary custodian of a team, an organization, a mission. Your role is not to own it or dominate it or leave some indelible, unchanging mark forever, but to nurture it for future generations.
A different time frame.
A much longer time frame, yes. It's about ensuring its vitality, its adaptability, and its ability to thrive long after you've moved on. A leader acting from stewardship recognizes that their primary responsibility is to the long-term health and longevity of the entity, not to their own personal glory or an inflated sense of self-importance. They foster a culture of continuous learning, fearless experimentation, and proactive adaptation. They don't cling to certainty. They cultivate readiness, an agile mindset. They understand that even at the absolute peak of success, the seeds of transformation or even decline are already present. They just are. So they actively look for those nascent changes, whether they are technological shifts, demographic changes, evolving customer needs, competitive innovations, and start preparing for them before they become full-blown crises. It's a profound shift from a reactive stance to a deeply proactive one.
Oh, okay, but how can a leader actually cultivate this readiness without falling into say, debilitating anxiety or paranoia about future decline. It seems like a very fine line between healthy foresight and constantly fearing the worst. How do you find that balance and instill it in a team?
It is indeed a fine line, and the key, I believe, lies in the attitude towards impermanence. It's not about fearing decline as some absolute end, but understanding it as a natural cyclical part of any growth process. Decline in one area often frees up energy and resources for growth in another, if you look closely. Cultivating readiness involves several interlinked practices. First, foster a culture of continuous learning and innovation within your team. Encourage curiosity, experimentation, and importantly, celebrating the listening that comes from failed attempts.
Make it safe to fail.
Exactly. Make learning the goal. Second, actively encourage constructive dissent and diverse perspectives. Don't surround yourself with yes men, but with people who will challenge your assumptions and point out potential blind spots. Third, set aside dedicated resources, time, budget, talent specifically for experimentation and future-proofing initiatives, even when current performance is stellar. Especially then, maybe.
Invest in the future.
Right. This could be R&D, pilot projects, cross-functional innovation teams, whatever fits. Fourth, actively scan the environment for weak signals of change, not just the obvious trends everyone is talking about. This means looking at fringe industries, demographic shifts, cultural movements, emerging technologies that might seem small or irrelevant today but could be massively disruptive tomorrow. It's about building organizational muscle for adaptation so that when disruption inevitably arrives, the organization isn't caught completely off guard, but is already poised mentally and structurally to pivot and evolve. It's about building resilience and agility into the very fabric of the organization. So that change isn't something to be dreaded, but something to be navigated with skill, presence, and maybe even a sense of excitement. It's a proactive stance born from deep understanding and foresight, not from a place of fear or paranoia. It allows a leader to move from thinking, how can I prevent this change, which is often futile, to asking, how can we best flow with and perhaps even shape this inevitable change? #, the enduring relevance of the Book of Change.
This really brings us full circle, doesn't it? Back to why the I Ching still matters so much today. Lóng Tíng says it's not because it gives us direct, simple answers, or because it feels ancient or mysterious, evoking some kind of mystical power. So if it's not about providing definitive answers, what is its enduring value for us right here, right now, in the 21st century?
Its enduring value lies in something far more fundamental, I think, and profound. It matters, as he puts it, because it keeps reminding us that leadership begins before the words, in the quiet moment where we decide whether we're willing to listen. And this deepens the idea of listening far beyond just hearing what people say in a meeting, doesn't it?
Much deeper.
It's about listening to the moment itself, to what is shifting under the surface, those unspoken currents, to the part of ourselves that maybe still remembers how to be in rhythm with something larger than our immediate plans or our ego's desires. It's really a call to a more profound, holistic form of awareness, a continuous attunement to reality as it unfolds.
So this isn't just about listening to your team or your customers then, important as that obviously is. It's about listening to the broader context, the unseen dynamics of a situation, the subtle whispers of change in the environment. And crucially, maybe listening to one's own inner wisdom and intuition. It almost sounds like a spiritual practice as much as a leadership discipline.
It absolutely touches on that, yes. True leadership, viewed from this perspective, really requires an internal calibration, a quiet attunement that goes beyond purely intellectual processing. It's about sensing the macro and micro changes, both external and internal. It's about having the humility to admit you don't have all the answers, but also the courage to sit in the stillness sometimes and listen for what wants to emerge, what the situation itself is calling for. It's about trusting that inner rhythm, that intuitive connection to the larger flow of life, rather than relying solely on logical analysis or past experience or a rigid adherence to fixed plans. It's about finding that deep inner resonance with change, not constantly fighting against it.
Lóng Tíng offers a truly profound concluding thought on this, something that beautifully encapsulates this entire deep dive, I feel, he says. And maybe that's already enough. Not a perfect strategy, not a finished sentence. Just the honest willingness to enter change with our eyes open and our hearts still intact. That's a powerful and quite poignant image, entering change with open eyes and an intact heart.
It really is. And this brings us to the ultimate purpose, perhaps, of embracing this ancient wisdom in modern leadership. Because the true art of global leadership, as he concludes, is not necessarily to reshape the world entirely in our own image, to impose our will or dominate every outcome. Instead, it's to enter the continuous movement of change with humility, with courage, and with profound presence, so that our actions become part of a larger harmony.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah,
Part of a larger harmony.
it fundamentally redefines impact or success in leadership, doesn't it? It's not about domination or leaving a singular, immutable mark that defies time. Instead, it's about integration. It's about contributing wisely and effectively to a larger, evolving system. It's about understanding that your actions are part of a grander, interconnected dance that you can influence, yes, but never fully control. It ties all three principles together beautifully. Situational awareness allows you to read the subtle shifts. Influence through alignment allows you to move with the flow and co-create. And acting with humility, understanding impermanence, allows you to contribute to that larger harmony without clinging to control, making your leadership truly resonant and ultimately sustainable. It's about becoming a skilled navigator of the ever-flowing river of reality. Hashtag outro.
Wow. What an illuminating deep dive into the I Ching and its, well, surprising wisdom for modern leadership. Let's quickly recap the most important insights from today's exploration just to crystallize them for you. The I Ching, this ancient book of change, teaches us a fundamental truth. Nothing stays fixed. Ever. And because of this profound understanding, our role as leaders isn't really to control reality or force outcomes, but rather to resonate with it, to flow with it. Ultimately, leadership, from this perspective, becomes a long, patient practice of listening, not just a title on a business card.
Exactly. And this foundational truth resonates through those three powerful principles Lóng Tíng shared from his unique perspective bridging ancient and modern worlds. First, leadership is profoundly situational, not static. There are no eternal best practices. Instead, true effectiveness comes from your disciplined awareness and, frankly, care in reading the unique context of your team, your culture, and your specific moment.
Right. And second, we learn that true influence arises from alignment, not from brute force. Rather than pushing ideas or dictating terms, genuine influence comes from slowing down, listening to what is already silently forming between people, and aligning with that deeper movement of things, that crucial concept of shit. It's a process of quiet co-creation, not imposition.
And third, the I Ching gently but persistently reminds us that every change contains its opposite. So we must always act with profound humility. And this isn't a cynical view, remember. It's a gentle, deeply pragmatic one. Understanding impermanence means leading from a place of stewardship, cultivating readiness for what's inevitably next, and releasing the ego's often counterproductive need for absolute certainty and control.
Understanding and embracing these principles offers you, we hope, a profound alternative to feeling constantly overwhelmed by change and uncertainty. It's a practical, actionable path to finding calm, effectiveness, and even a deep sense of harmony in really dynamic environments. And it challenges us, I think, to redefine what success and impact truly mean in our own leadership journeys. So, as you go about your day, maybe think about this provocative thought. If leadership truly begins in that quiet moment where we decide whether we are willing to listen, what unacknowledged silent formations are already taking shape around you right now? In your team, in your market, maybe even in your own personal life, just waiting for your humble presence to align with them.
Consider how shifting your focus just a bit from constant doing and controlling to a more profound listening and resonating might unlock entirely new possibilities, new harmonies you haven't yet imagined.
Thank you so much for joining us on this truly illuminating deep dive into ancient wisdom for modern leadership. We encourage you to reflect deeply on these principles and see how they might transform your approach to navigating the ever-flowing river of change. Until next time.